Hey, it's Gilbite here. In this video, I'm going to be replacing my rear brakes with these new G-Loc R6 compound pads. The R6 is generally considered for autocross, but you can also do some light track duty with it. To be safe, use jack stands, chock those front wheels. So using a 12 mil on the back of the pen and a 17 to hold the pen right here. You're going to break these loose. And also down here, same. That was, all right. Torque spec must not be too much on those. Just pull the bolts out. And they are the same length. Now you should be able to slide. Make sure your parking brake's not on. So with the parking brake off, it moves so much easier. You're gonna pull this out. Don't let it hang. And it will sit right here. Just make sure it doesn't fall. Your pads obviously are right here. You're just going to pull those out. Try not to touch the pad if you're going to reuse them at some point, and label them, because these are not worn at all. I'm just putting some racing brake pads on those G-Locs. Back pad is the same. And the back pad's the one that has the little screech tab, so that when pad gets low, it'll start squealing at you. So to remove your rotors, you got to remove this bracket. There's two 14 mil bolts, one here and one here. You just back those out, remove them, and then that'll let you pull this bracket off. There are specs for whether or not you need to replace your rotors. If you got a measuring tool, micrometer, you can measure it. But a simple thing to do is take your fingernail and do like this. Is there a ridge there? And on the top, mine doesn't have one. These have like no wear at all. So what I'm going to do is clean them up with some brake cleaner, and they'll be good to go. So if you do need to replace yours, after removing those 14 mil bolts, just pull that out. It'll just come right off. And your rotor, you just pull it out, pull it off. That's all there is to it. Your new rotor, clean it up with brake cleaner, put it on, and then put the bracket back on, torque to spec. Now you are going to want to clean this area where the pads sit in and slide. Now you'll notice, now I'm not going to get into the lubricate or not lubricate. The factory does not lubricate this. All right, there's nothing in there, nothing. You put your fingers up in there, Q-tip, whatever you want. That's just brake dust. They don't actually lubricate that. But we are going to clean them. And here's your caliper. So go ahead, and I recommend cleaning this all off. Hit it with brake cleaner, wipe it with a rag. If this video is helpful, please like, subscribe, comment. Let me know that it was actually helpful, so that I know that it's actually worth the extra time it takes to record all this. But using your caliper piston compression tool, after removing the cap on your master cylinder, you're going to want to compress the piston. I'll have a link to the tool that I use. Make sure you don't, if your master cylinder is high, make sure that you don't overfill it, because that brake fluid will make a mess and will eat your paint. It's highly corrosive. So let me talk about the pads for just a second. This shim is on the stock pad. along with the tab. The G-Loc pads do not have the tab nor the shim. So I could move the shim over, but the shim is actually only there for sound reasons. So it's just to cut down the sound a little bit. So I'm going to try mine without it, because that's generally, I'm going to be racing this up at the Corvette Museum track, and I want it straight onto the pad. But you can, if you're just doing your stock brake pads, go ahead and replace the shim. To lube or not to lube? That is the question. So the only place that this is actually lubed from the factory is these pins right in here. So if you can be sure that this is plain. Mine's a little dirty. So with those cleaned up, you can pull back the rubber seal, and there's your pin. It has got a high temp grease on it, and you can replace that with very light, you notice there's not much, just a very light coating of high temp lubricant, and then you will just put it back in, stretch the rubber seal over it, push it all the way in, make sure that it doesn't have an air pocket in there that's going to keep it from compressing. All right, now we're ready to put the pads in. I got my pad here. Where do I want to grease? Now, again, you don't have to grease them, but if you do, use a high temp silicone or ceramic grease. Now, I use a high temp copper based lubricant, an anti-seize. Now, don't use copper on rubber areas because it'll ruin the rubber. And so I went ahead and put a very thin, in fact, I put it on and then I wiped it off on this back pad. This is where the piston will be against. I don't want that to get on the rubber. That's why I've got it very thin. Okay, that's not going to come off. And then I got just this little thin layer there on the tabs. Don't get it on the pads. Just put it in the bottom first. It's just hard to do when there's a camera in the way. Okay, what I am trying to do is right here, push that back so I can then slide the pad in. There it goes. Now I'm going to do the same thing on this front pad. So the pad in the front, done the same thing. Just very light grease there on the tabs, but the end of the tab doesn't actually hit anything, it's the sides. And then I put some on the front. This is this side of the, you can't see it, where the brake caliper will be hitting, and I actually wiped it off. You see this? I wiped it off, so that's not going to spread. That's very key. If you don't use a runny lubricant. If you're going to use one at all, don't use a running one. So I get the bottom to go down in. Need a little screwdriver to push that, or your pinky. Now that's in. You can bring caliper down. If you're replacing with pads that have the pin, make sure the pin goes into one of the grooves on the piston. Make sure that piston is lined up so that that pin is in the groove. Slide it over. You'll have to push these pins in a little bit to get it to clear. So now you will just tighten these 12 mils to spec. Don't over tighten. And I should have mentioned, remember that this is on the back side, so it's going to be turning the wrong way as far as you know. So don't when you're taking it off, don't actually tighten it. Yeah, you want to torque those down. So I will put the torque specs in the description. Use at your own risk. This is what I found. So everything is back together and tight. I can move the caliper so it will float on the rotor. Now I need to pump up the brakes before I drive it for sure. Obviously I need to put the wheel and stuff on, but make sure that it moves. So after pumping the brakes, it's not moving sideways anymore. It won't slide because the pads are up against the rotor. And that's all you got to do, except wait, you really should bleed the brakes. Now I've done another video on that, so look up in the top right corner of your monitor of the display and you should see a link to that video. Now I do suggest, while you got the wheel off, go ahead and check your suspension components, make sure that they are tight. Your coilovers, if you got them, sway bar, check all that while you're here. So with the new pads on, be sure that you bed your pads in per the manufacturer's recommendation, or you can be like me and pay for the pre-bedding. Yeah, it's a lot easier. But I hope that was helpful. If so, please like, subscribe, comment, and good luck with yours.